Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our last live streaming class of our fall semester. Holy cow, has it gone quickly? And so I'm Katie. I coordinate our University Express program, and we're here with Caitlin Tucker, and we'll be talking about seeds. But before we dig into that, we'll just do our normal housekeeping stuff. So any questions or comments you have for Caitlin, feel free to put those in the chat or the Q&A. We'll try to get to as many as we can in the time that we have. We are recording, and I'll try to post this on the website in the near future if everything goes as planned. So quick shout out to our sponsors, my Department of Senior Services, Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield of Western New York, Excelsior Orthopedics, and Wegmans for all their support. And if you have questions about programs, services, benefits, things to do, give us a call at Senior Services. We're at 858-8526, and we'll do whatever we can to help you out. So the star of our show. Caitlin works as an extension aide with the Cornell Vegetable Program, which is a regional extension team that serves vegetable farmers in 14 counties across Western New York. Though her work is scattered across the region, she's housed in East Aurora. She's worked with urban farmers in the city of Buffalo for 3 years on vegetable production, soil health, food safety, and pest management. As a member of the Greater Buffalo Urban Growers Working Group, she helps to advocate for city policies that can better support urban farmers and community gardens. Maybe you caught her on part 1 and part 2 this semester. She co-chairs Cornell University's Urban Agriculture Program Work Team and sits on the NRCS Urban Agriculture Subcommittee. At home, she spends her time gardening, shocker, practicing backyard conservation, and working toward her MS in entomology at the University of Kentucky. She's very busy. She's here with us. Caitlin, thank you so much. It's all yours.
You are so welcome. That was a mouthful. I'm so sorry. I should have given you a shorter description. My name's Caitlin, and I'm happy to be here with you all today virtually. So we're going to talk about seeds and seed catalogs. I really don't think we have a more perfect day to talk about this with all of the snow outside. I do hope you got some snow if you like snow. And as we were talking about earlier, I hope you have a nice warm beverage and maybe a fireplace or a Netflix fireplace channel going on in the background. So let's get into this. My name's Caitlin. I mentioned that already. I work for Cornell Cooperative Extension. That was mentioned already. So I work in a 14-county region. If you look at that map on the top right, all of those counties in red are ones that our team serves. We work specifically with commercial vegetable producers on every topic that you can think of related to vegetable production, on every vegetable you can think of that is grown in Western New York. And my role on the team is to help conduct research and education around fresh market vegetables. I do a lot of work with season extension, so high tunnels, caterpillar tunnels, greenhouses, that sort of thing. A great deal of work around food safety and urban agriculture, of course. So yeah, if you get a chance and you are interested in the topic, you can go back and look at the first 2 presentations I gave or helped to give this past semester on the Erie County, New York YouTube page. Whoop, sorry about that, folks. So beyond being here to present as an employee of Cornell Cooperative Extension, I'm here to present as someone who is an avid gardener herself and a once upon a time market gardener back in Missouri. So these are a few pictures of our garden over the years. I love seeds. I love growing things. That bottom middle picture is my perfect idea of a spring Sunday morning when I'm planting something. I've got homemade biscuits and jam. I've got a warm cup of coffee. I kind of wish I was there right now, but I'm very happy to be here with you talking about it instead. I also have professional experience working with seeds. So my degree's emphasis was in plant breeding, and I worked for a time in a soft red winter wheat breeding program where we were working to develop new varieties of wheat with higher yields, better disease resistance, early maturity, ideal heights. And so that soft red winter wheat, that is the kind of wheat that goes on to make the flour that you use in your pastries and your cupcakes and your cookies. So it was a great experience to work in that breeding program. I sometimes wish I could still be out in the field evaluating different plots of wheat for all of their unique traits, but I am very happy doing what I'm doing now. So how we're going to spend the next hour of our time together. We are going to learn about the many different ways to describe a seed. So I've chosen some key terminology that I think folks should know about as they're browsing through seed catalogs this winter. And we're going to also talk about how to choose seeds that are going to thrive here in your garden in Western New York. And then I'll share some unique places to source seed and cover a few resources here and there to just get you thinking about what you should order this winter. So let's jump into some of this terminology in no particular order. We're going to start with heirloom. So definitions of heirloom vary slightly depending on who you ask. And some organizations and seed companies describe heirlooms as varieties that have been passed down specifically for 50 years or more. That's a perfectly fine definition, but I really like this description from the Seed Savers Exchange. So they describe heirloom as a seed's heritage, specifically a documented heritage of being passed down from generation to generation within a family or community. An heirloom variety must be open pollinated or pollinated by insects, birds, wind, or other natural means, and it must breed true. And what that means is it's going to retain its original traits from one generation to the next. And heirlooms in general, I think, have pretty significant cultural significance for the communities, for the families that they originate from. Over the years, communities have been very intentional about saving seed from plants that had particular flavors they were after, that thrived in their climates, that were resistant to diseases. They may have exciting and beautiful and sometimes mysterious stories tied to them. And so I think we can all appreciate that heirlooms truly are living history. Not to mention, they are an incredible source of diversity, which is important for the resilience of our food system. Determinate and indeterminate. So these are terms used to describe varieties of tomatoes. Determinate tomatoes are determined. They have a determined growth habit. They are more compact. They are bush type varieties. Their fruit often will ripen within a short period of time. That may just be a 2 to 3 week period. And they're typically better for container growing or small spaces. Indeterminate tomatoes, on the other hand, are vining varieties, and they will produce fruit right up until the last frost. Both types are going to benefit from staking, but pruning requirements differ. I won't get into the details with that, but in general, indeterminate tomatoes are absolutely going to benefit from regular pruning just to keep those plants in check. Whereas pruning determinate tomatoes focuses more on removing the tomato suckers below the first flower cluster. Organic. Some seeds are labeled as organic. They might have the symbol OG next to them. It might say USDA organic in order to market the seeds as or organic. You do have to go through a certification process with the USDA. And that means that these seeds were grown according to National Organic Program standards. So whether you are growing organic carrots or organic seeds, if you are a certified organic grower, you have to follow certain practices. like not using synthetic fertilizers or pesticides or herbicides. You're not using genetically modified seeds. You're following holistic management practices that might include crop rotation, incorporating cover crops, adding compost. And in general, I think organic seeds are going to be slightly more expensive. And if you are a commercial organic grower, which many of you on this call may not be, you might just be a backyard gardener like me, but if you are a commercial certified organic grower, you're going to have to plant organic seed. But for you and I, it's completely up to us, right? We are not required by anyone to grow organic seeds, but perhaps supporting organic seed companies and growing organic seeds aligns more with our personal gardening philosophies, right? That's up to each and every one of us to make those decisions. Non-GMO. Okay, so that stands for non-genetically modified organism. This is, I'm not going to give you a genetics lesson here. That's not what we're here for. But with GMOs, essentially genetic material, think of it as DNA, is transferred from one organism to another that gives that organism different traits. And so a few examples I can share with you. GMO corn has been genetically engineered to express Bt. That stands for Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a bacteria that's commonly found in our soil, a bacteria that is commonly used in organic production, and is a bacteria that you could purchase at a local gardening store, home improvement store for use in your own backyard to control many different types of caterpillar pests. And but corn doesn't naturally contain Bt. It has been genetically engineered to produce it. So think of GMO corn as a corn plant and an insecticide in one. GMO soybeans have been genetically engineered to withstand herbicide sprays so that farmers can come through, they can spray their fields for weeds, but the soybeans won't be harmed. GMO potatoes have been engineered to reduce bruising and browning. So there are only a handful of GMO crops that are grown in the US. Most of those are going to be commodity crops like soybeans and canola and corn, cotton, to a lesser extent, apples, alfalfa, summer squash. But you will not find GMOs commercially available in a gardening seed catalog. They're not available to folks like you and I. However, the seed company you buy your seeds from may be owned or connected to a company that does sell GMOs. But again, it's your prerogative as a consumer whether you choose to support that seed company or not, or whether you support GMO production or not. Hybrid. This is another genetic term. It's not as intimidating as GMO, I think. Hybrids are also referred to as F1s or first filial generation. So they are the first generation of seeds from two parent lines. And an example that, it's not a perfect example, but an example I'll share with you is that you have my parents, my two lovely parents who did not know that they're debuting in this presentation. But you cross them together and you get me, the F1 generation, which has the best traits of both, right? They might not agree there, but they'll never see this, and hopefully you get the point. When you're creating a hybrid, breeders are taking two parents that have ideal traits and they're crossing them together in hopes that the F1 generation will have the best traits of both. That might be higher yields and disease resistance. It might be disease resistance and a specific color of fruit or early maturity or shape and so on. And an important note here about hybrids is that if you are someone who loves to save seed from plants, technically you can save seed from hybrids, but you should not expect the seed to retain the traits from the parent plants. And that's because those traits exist in that plant specifically because two specific parent plants were crossed to get that trait. And it's simply not going to be passed down. So you can save seed, but you don't really know what you're going to get. Parthenocarpic. You might come across this term when you are browsing in the cucumber or the squash or watermelon section of the seed catalog. Parthenocarpic varieties will develop fruit without pollination, without fertilization. But the fruit that they will produce is either going to produce non-viable seeds or it might not have seeds at all. And these seeds are going to be especially useful if you are growing crops under insect netting, if you are growing in greenhouses or high tunnels, if you are growing indoors, any setting where you're probably not going to get a lot of pollination by insects, growing a parthenocarpic variety may be the way to go. If you're not growing in any of those environments, you can probably skip over the parthenocarpic varieties. Open pollinated. I've shared this term already with heirlooms, but this means that pollination is allowed to occur naturally, whether that is by wind or by insects, by birds, by other animals. The opposite of that is more controlled pollination, which is what happens with those hybrids. A breeder is intentionally crossing one plant with another plant, whereas with open pollination, everything that naturally occurs is allowed to naturally occur. So you might have greater variation between plants because of this, but on the flip side, that means that there is more genetic diversity, which is great if you are a seed saver. Heirlooms, as I mentioned, are generally open pollinated. So as long as you're not growing multiple varieties, so like multiple open pollinated cucumber varieties in the same area, if you save seed, you can generally expect that the open pollinated seed is going to grow true to type. So it's going to retain those original traits. Okay, annual versus perennial versus biennial. A lot of ulls in there. So this refers to the length of growing season that a plant requires, but before it is fully developed, before it might produce fruits and seeds, and just generally describes the life cycle habits of a plant. So annual crops dominate our backyard gardens. Things like tomatoes and eggplant and watermelon and okra and corn and sunflowers. All of these crops complete their life cycle in one season. Perennial crops grow for many years. They come back every year. So many of our perennial native flowers like echinacea, rudbeckia, horseradish, rhubarb, berries, these are all going to be perennials. Biennial refers to a flowering plant that takes 2 growing seasons to complete its life cycle. And this is going to be important mostly if you're interested in seed saving. So crops like carrots and beets, cauliflower, these are all biennials. And so in the first year of their growth, they spend their time on vegetative growth. They're going to focus on the top growth, and in case of carrots or beets, they're going to focus on that root growth as well. Over winter, those roots will help support that plant until the following year when new top growth will emerge. And in the second season, they will go on to produce flowers and then seeds. Nativar. So full disclaimer, I'm not a native plant specialist. I'm just a native plant enthusiast. But an entire presentation, I think, could be devoted to the topic of nativars. And I'm not the one to lead it, but this is a topic that is is a concern somewhat, and so I just want to share it with you, share some of the hesitations around nativars. So nativars are cultivars of native species that have been bred for different traits. That could be bloom size, bloom shape, bloom color, bloom number. It might be variegation, it might be other general aesthetic traits that are pleasing to you and I. And nativars have become increasingly common in greenhouses and nurseries, and often we might see them with a tag that says native when they're not actually native. So where you have a purple coneflower echinacea plant, right, in the top right, now you have all of these new varieties of echinacea, all of these nativars. We have deeper reds, we have deeper pinks and lighter pinks, we have different color patterns on the petals and different petal shapes and orientations. And I mean, just the options are endless. This is just a sampling of some of the echinacea varieties I found in one catalog. But the concern around them is that if you aspire to support our native wildlife and ecosystems by planting native varieties, there's just a lot that we still don't know about how nativars will affect pollinators and wildlife. Because these varieties have been bred for various aesthetic traits, they might not be as attractive to pollinators. And so I guess an equivalent might be a tomato breeder has identified yield and fruit size and disease resistance as the ultimate traits to have in a tomato. And they do that, they develop that variety, they put it in a seed catalog, we buy it, we grow it, and we are super impressed by the fruit size. It's amazing. The yield is amazing. It's incredibly disease resistant, but it's flavorless and bland, and we don't want to eat a single tomato. So going back to the nativars, if we are selecting plants, if we are developing plants only for how pleasing they are to us, and not for how pleasing they are to pollinators and wildlife, we may result in nativars that do not provide similar nutrition from pollen or nectar. They may not produce seeds, or if they do produce seeds, they may not be viable seeds. And if we're changing the floral structures, insects like moths or butterflies may not be able to pollinate them simply because they can't get their proboscis where it needs to go. So all of this to say that there are a lot of unknowns with nativars, and I'd encourage you to reach out to your local greenhouses and nurseries and ask them if the plants they are selling are actually natives or if they are nativars. And if you have recommendations for local nurseries and greenhouses that do sell native ecotypes, please put them in the chat box. I know I would personally love some of those recommendations as well. Okay, treated. When you see that a seed is treated, it means that it has been coated either with a fungicide, a pesticide, or an inoculant, which I will cover in a few slides. So the catalog should tell you what the seed has been specifically treated for. And the reason that some seeds are coated is to provide them with protection from either soil-borne diseases or soil-dwelling insects that may feed on seeds. Or they may be treated with a bacterial inoculant that is needed for legumes. They are required by law to be a different color so that growers can tell they've been treated and take appropriate precautions. Above are examples of 2 treated seeds. So we have crimson clover, a legume that has been treated in a gray coating. It contains an inoculant. And this is sorghum Sudan on the right, which is a cover crop. It's hard to tell, but it is pink in color. Pelleted seed refers to seed that has been coated with an inert material like clay. And this is going to help make planting easier. It's going to allow for more uniform planting, either by hand or with a mechanical planter. So some seeds are awkward shapes, or they have variable shapes, or they're just simply very teeny tiny. And this coating helps to smooth out the edges and make it easier for us to pick them up. So some of the seeds that are commonly available in pelleted forms are going to be carrots and lettuce, onions, parsnips, beets, some flowers. And an important note here is that because they have been coated, they have been exposed to some moisture. And that exposure to moisture means that they might have a lower viability because their seed coat has been primed, if you will. So they might not last as long as a non-pelleted seed. Okay, inoculants. Inoculants are bacteria. Good, healthy bacteria. That's called rhizobia or rhizobacteria. And they form relationships with legumes like peas and beans, peanuts, clover, hairy vetch. And we love legumes for many reasons. And one of the reasons is that they fix nitrogen. They take nitrogen that's in the atmosphere and they bring it into the soil. But a misconception is that the plant is actually doing it when it's actually the rhizobacteria that take that atmospheric nitrogen and convert it into a form that plants can use. And that's a special exchange that they have with these legumes. They fix the nitrogen, and in return, they get to live in these nice, cozy root nodules that you'll find on legume roots, where they have nutrition and shelter. And so you can buy inoculant either in a powdered form, like in the top right photo there, or you can buy legume seed, as I mentioned, that has been treated with inoculants. If you have been growing legumes for many years in your garden, you probably don't need to buy inoculants because your soil should already have a pretty healthy population of that bacteria. But if you haven't, I would suggest investing in some inoculant in one form or another to make sure that your legumes get off to a healthy start. Okay, this isn't a very exciting slide. I apologize for that. Stratification, scarification, vernalization. You may come across some of these terms in catalogs, but you're more likely to encounter them as you dig into details on how to grow a particular plant. And all of these are what, I'll call them treatments. They speak to a different process that a seed needs to undergo that is important for their germination or development. And so stratification, you are trying to break seed dormancy by mimicking natural conditions. And that varies from plant to plant. Some seeds like to be stratified in cool temperatures. Some seeds like to be stratified in warmer temperatures. This is often required for perennials and trees. And you can do this inside in a Ziploc bag with a moist paper towel, either in a refrigerator or maybe you could put it on top of the refrigerator if it needs to be in a warm area. Ultimately, you need to dig into the details of a particular plant that you're trying to grow to make sure that you are giving that seed what it needs to break seed dormancy. Scarification is breaking seed dormancy by scratching or nicking or otherwise softening the seed coat. And this might be common, or it is common for harder seeds like nasturtiums, legumes, okra, many trees, many perennials. You'll find that that's common across many of these terms. Many perennials and many trees require these different treatments. But you can scarify seeds either with a file or a knife or hot water. Again, it's dependent on what seed we're talking about here. Vernalization is seeds must be exposed to cold temperatures to stimulate germination and or produce flowers. So it seems somewhat similar to stratification, but stratification could be warm or cold temperatures. Vernalization, we're specifically talking about cold temperatures here. Things like winter wheat, many biennial plants, artichokes, may require vernalization, varying lengths of vernalization. And this is something that you can also do at home inside your refrigerator. I will share one crop specific piece of information, and that pertains to onions, because this is a lesson that I have learned over the years. And so onions can be categorized into long day, short day, or intermediate day types. And this refers to the length of daylight that the variety requires to initiate bulb formation. And that is, after all, what we're after with onion production, those bulbs. So long day onions will start forming bulbs when the day length reaches 14 to 16 hours of daylight. Intermediate at 12 to 14, short day at 10 to 12. And when we think about how onion bulbs develop and how an onion in general grows, all of that top growth is going to provide the nutrition and energy to the bulb at a specific time. And so it seems like it might be a small difference to grow a short day onion in a long day region. But when you do that, the plant is going to start forming a bulb earlier on before there's enough top growth to actually send down all of that nutrition and energy it needs. And so ultimately you're going to end up with smaller bulbs. So long day onions here in Erie County. Cover crops. Cover crops are starting to get more attention in seed catalogs, and rightfully so. We spend a lot of time growing for ourselves and our pollinators and our birds. Why not grow something for our soil? So cover crops are non-cash crops. That is, we are not growing them for the purpose of making money if we are a commercial grower. We are not growing them necessarily to eat them or to harvest them for us, but they are grown for the ecosystem services they provide. And that depends, the services depend on which species we're talking about, but it might be things like reducing erosion, scavenging nutrients, weed suppression, reducing compaction, supporting soil microbes. I mean, the list goes on and on. And as far as crops, we're talking about things like clover and triticale and field peas and hairy vetch and buckwheat and sorghum Sudan. There are a lot of options out there for cover crops. And so when you're choosing a cover crop, it's important to consider a few things, like what does your crop rotation look like? You know, these are plants, they are susceptible to insect pests and diseases. So you'll want to make sure that, you know, you're rotating appropriately. You also need to think about what you want your cover crop to do. So going back to all of those services, what do you want? What does your soil need? And you need to think about how long of a window you have for planting. If you're growing as soon as it's warm enough in the spring, you may not have enough time to squeeze in a cover crop before spring planting. Maybe you have enough time in the fall. Maybe it's September and you're just, you're done. You're just done with all the tomatoes. You're done with all the weeds. You want to rip it all out. Well, you don't have to leave that soil bare over the fall and winter. You can plant a cover crop. But think also about how you're going to terminate and incorporate it. These crops are typically mown down or cut down and somehow incorporated back into the soil. And so think about how you'll do that. And in the bottom right is a resource I want to share. This is from the Northeast Cover Crops Council. They have a cover crop explorer and a species selector where you can go in and you can look at different cover crop plant profiles and see all of the different benefits they provide, learn about how roughly expensive they might be, how much you should plant in your area. This is designed for farmers, but there is no reason why you and I can't use this for our backyard gardens. Royalties. So royalties might be mentioned kind of sporadically in seed catalogs. They might not be mentioned at all in some seed catalogs. These are payments that are made to an individual plant breeder, a breeding program, or a community in recognition of their seed work. After all, they plant breeders and seed savers spend a great deal of time and care developing some of these varieties, and the royalties support them in their continued endeavors. And it's typically a small percentage of sales. In our breeding program, the wheat breeding program I worked in, we relied on royalties from sales of varieties that we developed to continue supporting our program financially. And in recent years, there's been a lot of work. Some seed catalogs recognize that we can thank many marginalized communities for a lot of the varieties we grow today, many of which have been profited off of by companies. You know, we see varieties given indigenous names without involvement or recognition of their work. And so some seed companies are trying to do right by that by paying royalties to indigenous keepers of seed. So I just wanted to share this in general with you as one other thing you might consider in choosing which seed catalog you want to support or not. Okay, choosing varieties that thrive in Western New York. I'll try to kind of breeze through this section. So disease resistance is an important thing to consider. More importantly, we need to understand that resistance is a spectrum from susceptible to resistant, and complete resistance is often a moving target for plant breeders and seed savers because plant diseases are constantly evolving, and you have to also consider all of those other traits that a consumer, a gardener might want. So it's a balancing act. Disease resistance is shared in catalogs in a few different ways. Some catalogs might use a series of symbols. It might be abbreviations like TLS stands for target leaf spot, ALS, angular leaf spot, DM stands for downy mildew. Some might just provide a description. They might say, oh, it has high resistance or intermediate resistance to late blight. But in choosing disease-resistant varieties, it's important that you know what to look for based on historical issues in your garden, as well as some of the issues that we face pretty regularly as a region. And I'll share some examples of that in a couple of slides. Plant viruses are, of course, a specific type of plant disease. I want to mention them separately, though. They can be spread by insects like leafhoppers or aphids. They can be spread through infected seed. That does occasionally happen, where you might purchase seed from a company and it is infected. Many seed companies do test their seed for diseases, though it's just, it's sometimes random. They can also be spread through tools or hands or equipment, and they cause a wide range of symptoms depending on the crop we're talking about and the virus we're talking about. It could be leaf curling, it could be mottling, it could be ring spots like in the watermelon in the top left, malformed fruit, no fruit. The most important thing to know is that plant viruses cannot be cured. And so that might be a motivating factor for you to invest in seed that does have some resistance to certain viruses. But ultimately, viruses showing up in your garden tends to be fairly sporadic within a growing season and from one season to the next. So it can be hard to know what type of virus resistance you should invest in. But I want you to know that virus resistance is available as well in some varieties for some crops. Some of the common diseases I see from year to year and may be worth investing in resistant varieties include downy mildew of cucumber. So this is a fungus-like pathogen that blows in on the wind from areas where it can overwinter. And it can quickly affect cucumbers by reducing the photosynthetic area. It causes defoliation. It can lead to sun scald and, of course, reduced yield. And there's really no treatment for it once your cucumbers have it. And on the right here is an example of some cucumbers that just started to get it. You can kind of see a little bit of yellowing here and there. And this is what they looked like just a short couple of weeks later. So it can rapidly take down your cucumbers it might not hurt to look into downy mildew resistant cucumbers. Late blight, early blight, basal downy mildew is another one. So this is similar to downy mildew that affects cucumber, but it specifically affects sweet basil varieties. And what you'll see is some yellow discoloration on the top of the leaf. It's almost like striping. And then on the bottom, if you flip that over, you see this mass of grayish black spores. And this is another disease where once you get it, your basil is going to go down pretty quickly, and might be worth investing in downy mildew resistant basil varieties. Insect resistance. This is something you're probably not going to see mentioned much in seed catalogs, and for good reason. Insect resistance is less straightforward because plants can be resistant to insects in a few different ways. And one is that they can be less preferable. They might be less tasty, they might have too many hairs or spines, their leaves might be too waxy. Whatever it is, that insect says, meh, I'm not too interested in this plant. The second way plants can be resistant is they can be toxic. So plants can produce defensive compounds that can make insects feel ill. They might be less nutritious and result in slower growth, or they might cause death. And then finally, plants can simply be tolerant of insect damage. So even if insects are feeding on them, they can tolerate some and still continue to grow and flower and produce fruit. So just wanted to explain that in case you're like, why don't I see much insect resistance in the seed catalog? A hard truth to accept is that we simply won't be able to grow certain things outside in our environment because of our climate and our hardiness zones. And these are maps that the USDA created to help growers like us determine which plants are likely to thrive in our environment. And so they factor in the annual minimum winter temperature, divide it into 10-degree Fahrenheit zones, and they range all the way from, I think, 1A to 13B. I don't even know where a 1A location is in the US. It's probably a very extremely cold place to live. But there are some limitations to using these zones in determining what we can and cannot grow. But I won't get into that nuance today. I want to zoom into Erie County. So our zones range from 5A to 6A, depending on whether you're in the South Towns and deeper into the hills or whether you're closer to the lake. Our first frost can happen anywhere from October 1st to October 31st. Our last frost can be anywhere from May 21st to June 11th. I think we did have a couple of frosts a couple of years ago, actually, into June. That was a bummer. Number of growing days can vary in between 115 to 195 days. These maps were last updated in 2012, and that's important to know that they're almost a decade old, because the thing with climate is that it's changing, and so are our plant hardiness zones. So they are moving north in the US at 13 miles per decade. This is a quick video of that shift over the last 21 years. I'll play this a couple of times, but just try to focus in on a particular spot. So I'll play that again if you didn't get a chance to see it. My eye is drawn to Missouri because that's where I am from. But you can see that there's a considerable shift in zone just over 21 years. And so knowing that our last maps were from 2012, what might our hardiness zone look like now? What might it look like in 10 years? And that affects our decision making when it comes to looking at days to maturity. So this is roughly an estimate of how long it will take a crop to be mature or set fruit from time of sowing the seed to transplanting. And this number can be quite frustrating for some growers because it's sometimes accurate and sometimes it's not. It's really dependent on environmental factors that will affect plant growth, like temperature and soil and rainfall. And of course, these numbers might not hold up or hold true based on your personal preferences. Like you might prefer to harvest your carrots or your squash when they're quite small, just because it says that they are mature by 115 days doesn't mean that you might not be able to harvest them at 90 or 130. So there's some nuance there. But it does matter when it comes to thinking about how long our growing season is. So that 115 to 195 day long season. And so if our season airs on the side of 115 days and you're shopping for watermelon and you see that it takes 110 days to mature, this might be a risky bet for you because you may not have enough time to get a substantial harvest. In talking about climate, I will also share that the majority of seeds in the US are grown in other states. California, Oregon, Idaho are the big seed producers in this country, and they are going to have pretty different climates, soil types, humidity, length of growing season compared to ours, which means that the seeds coming from these states might not be exceptionally adapted to grow here in New York. And that is why regionally adapted seeds have become popular in recent years. So these seeds have been selected for their ability to tolerate and thrive our particular environmental conditions. Maybe they're better suited for extreme heat or drought. They might have better disease resistance to the diseases that most often affect us. They might be earlier to mature. They might grow better in our soils. So there is a regional seed company map that you can visit to find places where you can source regionally adapted seeds. Currently, we only have one company in New York, and that is Fruition Seeds, located in the Finger Lakes. So you've probably heard of folks setting up little free libraries at the end of their driveway. Seed libraries are one of my new favorite things. These are popping up like sprouts across Erie County as a way to reduce barriers to backyard gardening, give folks an easy way to try new varieties, and of course to share the bounty of saved seeds with your community. So we have one in Hamburg, one in Amherst, the seed library at the launch pad. I believe that's at the downtown branch of the library. Massachusetts Avenue Project, one of our urban farms, I believe has a seed library in their entrance. So I'd encourage you to check those out and support them when you can. Many seed companies appreciate seeds for their diversity and their resilience and their stories. They want to make sure that everyone has access to seeds that they grew up with or that are part of their culture. So if you're someone who is having difficulty finding a special variety of Asian eggplant or African maize or Italian tomato or Syrian cucumber, you might try visiting one of these seed companies that specialize in offering seeds from different cultures. And as I wrap up, I know that we've all got our own process. So when we sit down and browse through the seed catalogs, maybe it's less of a process and more just circling everything that catches your eye, right? I think that's how it typically goes for me. I'm just trying to exert some self-control when I make my selections. But I'm trying to be more methodical in recent years and asking myself important questions like, how did last season go? You know, there are some varieties that I may never want to grow again. There are others that, you know, I liked, but they really didn't thrive in my soil. There are others that are definitely going to be a staple in my garden from year to year. You need to think about what varieties in general you enjoyed, what diseases and insects attacked your plants. Are these recurring issues? Should you start investing in downy mildew resistant cucumbers? Are you growing in raised beds? Are you growing indoors? Are you growing in containers? All of these environments will impact how well a particular variety does. And assess your current collection. So how old are your seeds? Are they still going to germinate in the spring? It doesn't hurt to dig into that because after all, seeds do lose germination and viability over time if they're not stored well. It's really easy to search for this type of information. Length of time depends on the crop, of course, but in general, you should aim for cool temperatures and low humidity. And if you do have older seeds, like me, I have a lot of older seeds, it does not hurt to do a germination test before you order new ones, just to make sure that you are ordering what you need. And you can do that in a pretty easy way by taking 10 seeds, placing them in a moist paper towel in a Ziploc bag, and then putting that Ziploc bag somewhere warm where those seeds are going to germinate, and check them in a few days. If only 3 of 10 seeds have sprouted, your germination is 30%. And so you might consider ordering some new seeds sometime soon, or at least accounting for that when you plant in the spring. So I know I had to breeze through those last few slides. I apologize. I have so much I want to share with you. That is all I have for you today. I'm really happy you all joined in. And at this time, I would be thrilled to take any questions you all have. I do have questions of my own if it's quiet. So Katie, I'll pass it to you.
Oh, Caitlin, thank you so much. Yes, so a couple questions to start. This first one is, are nativars and cultivars the same? Can you please explain the difference if not?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So cultivar, think of it as just referring to as another name for variety. And so the term nativar is just the merging of native with cultivar. So it just refers to a variety of native plants. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.
This next one is, if a perennial gets a disease one year, does that mean it will get the disease the next year?
That's another good question. And I hate to say it depends, because it probably does depend on whether you are, whether that is a soil-borne disease or whether it is a foliar disease, and whether you are treating it, if you're actively trying to manage it culturally somehow. Maybe that's by pruning, maybe that's by removing all of the diseased foliage so that you don't have some of that overwintering around that space where the perennial's going. So I would say it depends. There's a chance that that perennial could come back with the same disease, but it depends on the crop and how you're managing it.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. Next is, any advice for seed starting inside?
Ooh, lighting. Lighting is so important. And even as, I'm telling you this, I'm thinking in the back of my mind how I still don't have a great lighting setup at home. But you really don't want those seedlings to be leggy. And adequate lighting is going to help with that. There are warming mats available if you're trying to grow in a cold room. So that might help, but you do want to be mindful of how warm the warming mat gets. It can get too warm. It can be damaging on the seeds. I like buying, there are these hoods, plastic hoods that you can put over a tray that have ends that open up. So you can maintain humidity early on when you're trying to get those seeds to germinate. But when it's maybe too humid and too warm, especially under your really awesome light setup, you can open up the ends to kind of allow for some airflow. And I could just ramble on. But there are a lot of great resources out there for seed starting. Maybe that's another presentation we can give in the spring.
I like the idea. Thank you, Caitlin. This next one is, do you have any thoughts on deer resistance?
Yeah. On selecting deer resistant varieties, I do not unfortunately have much to share in that regard. Not an expert in deer resistance. You can check my garden to just confirm. Yeah, I'm sorry. I think it's pretty easy to Google deer resistant varieties. I think in combination with finding plants that are less preferable for them, it's also a matter of excluding them and like keeping them out of the general area. And Yeah, even then they might still find a way. They always do, right?
They do. We have, thank you, this was great. Central Library just started a seed library. What would you suggest as a popular seed for this area?
Ooh, that's a good question. I whenever you asked that, I immediately started thinking about popular seeds. Like if you are someone who's just starting to grow, it's really important to have a good experience, right? And so I'm thinking of seeds that are good for new beginners. In general, leafy greens are great. Um, Something like a radish would be great. Tomatoes are pretty resilient. I think tomatoes are a good option. Something like carrots are difficult to get to germinate and require a lot of care. So I think having a good selection in general, but make sure you include a lot of seeds that are going to give folks, new growers, a good experience and keep them wanting to come back. And I haven't had the chance to talk to many of the seed libraries about this, but there are considerations. Like if you are asking community members to share their seed with your seed library, you do need to think about, well, what kind of plants are they selecting seed from? Is there a chance that these seeds could carry diseases? We certainly don't want new growers to accidentally pick up some seeds that might have a virus from them. And there are ways that you can, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. So education, providing some resources for your community on seed saving would be great. So they know kind of what your expectations are for if they're bringing seed to you for the seed library. And you can also treat seeds using it's called heat treatment. It's basically a hot water bath for seeds that is effective and can be done at home especially if you have like a sous vide piece of equipment in your kitchen. But that's something else you can Google for more information, or you can reach out to me. Either is fine.
Yeah, a lot to think about. Thank you. This last thing that I'm seeing here is thought that Dusty Miller is an annual. It's come back 2 years and had flowers. Also, how long can you keep flower seeds? Thank you for this presentation. It went fast. Glad you're in Western New York.
Yes, with flower seeds, I would have to Google that myself. I don't spend a lot of time on ornamentals within my work. And in my personal garden, that's an area that I still need to learn about as well. So I would suggest Googling it. It's probably going to be dependent on the type of flower that you're talking about. And if you've saved seed, how well you are storing it, of course.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. We'll just give it another second here to see if anything else comes through. Is there anything else you want to share with us, Caitlin, before we close?
No, I wish I had more time with you to share more about this topic. I mean, there's so many more terms, so many other considerations. I am happy to talk with you more about this. If you are someone who is affiliated with one of the seed libraries and you are interested in more information on how you can ensure that you're getting good quality seed from local seed savers, yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out. I love this stuff. I know you all love this stuff. Happy to connect with you.
Yes, this was wonderful. And now we just have a bunch of thank yous flooding in. So, Caitlin, thank you for your time today and for the knowledge. And everyone that's on, thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.